that working? Yes. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Just wait for the last stragglers to take their seats. The sheepdog will follow them in and bark loudly. Whoops-a-daisy. As you're aware by now, my name is Jim Kane, and I'm today's moderator for the lectures, and we're about ready to get underway. So first up this morning we have Doug Grant, the World Federation Vice President for New Zealand, and Hayden, Foulds, President of the New Zealand Rose Society, and they will be talking on, have I lost it now? Rose gardens of New Zealand and such, and public. The whole today is about the rose with the public and in public spaces, so it will be around that theme. And also rose breeders of New Zealand, very important. I can remember some really good ones in talking to them in my visits to New Zealand over the years. So now first up I will introduce Doug Grant.
Good morning all. I always enjoy coming back to Adelaide because my family moved here from the United Kingdom in 1836, and they were part of the original settlement of Adelaide. Unfortunately for us Kiwis, they moved to New Zealand in 1878. This morning I promised Kelvin and his fellow Australians we're not going to talk about cricket because we could be here all morning. Today Hayden and I are going to do a double act on rose gardens, roses and breeders in New Zealand. As you well know, it's a country of lovely rose gardens, great roses and a great climate for roses. We'll get this thing moving. It's working. Firstly, we'll start up in the north and show you some gardens. I'm just showing you some of the major gardens. I'm not going through all the gardens of the country because that would also take us all morning. Firstly, we start up in Whangarei, up in the top end. Just outside the city centre, there's a delightful garden of Kaffler Park. And in this garden you'll see some of the local roses like Hikurangi, named after Mount Hikurangi, bred by Sam McCready. You'll also see Northland, bred by Sam McCready, and Northland is the name of the area Whangarei is in. As we move down to Auckland, in Auckland City, you'll remember, some of you may remember the regional convention we held there in 2003. Sam McCready named a rose City of Auckland, a nice apricot hybrid tea, and he also named Auckland Metro, and some of you may know this by Precious Michelle or by Metro itself. Also in Auckland, Sam named a series of miniature roses by Auckland names. One was Takapuna, another was Hauraki, and he also named Remuera for a suburb in Auckland. For the gardens of Auckland, we first start with the Parnell Rose Garden, and those rosarians who would have gone to the 2003 regional convention may have probably stayed in the hotel opposite the gardens. It's a delightful garden that was set up in conjunction with the New Zealand Rose Society and opened, in, if my memory is correct, in 1932. As part of this garden, on the other side of the roadway is the Nancy Steen Rose Garden, This is a garden of heritage roses, and it has an extensive collection of heritage roses, and this is maintained by members of the Auckland branch of Heritage Roses New Zealand. If we move down the main highway for about 30 minutes drive, we will come to the Auckland Botanic Gardens, and in the Botanic Gardens we have a major rose garden. Once this used to be an extensive trial ground for trialling roses for New Zealand. This is no longer the case. That trial ground moved to Hamilton, and we'll tell you more about that later. On this slide you'll see on the bottom picture a rose called Everlasting Love. This was one of my creations, also known in New Zealand as Millennium. Here we go. Auckland and the Botanic Gardens, they have a rose garden which is interplanted with New Zealand native trees and shrubs. It looks quite effective when you've got the two groups together. Quite an effective garden. Auckland's Botanic Gardens, rose garden has gone spray-free for many years now. No chemicals going on it for fungicides, pesticides. Further down the highway, if we drive for another 3/4 of an hour, 45, 50 minutes, we come to Hamilton, where we have the Rogers Rose Garden. And this garden was a World Federation Garden of Excellence Award winner in 2006. It's set in a delightful sort of a scene with native trees and other large specimen trees around the outside of the garden and also in the garden. It is now the site for the New Zealand Rose of the Year trial. And the New Zealand Rose of the Year is held there every year. And a number of you would have probably been to this garden. In Hamilton, we have a rose from Sam McCready named after the gardens, Hamilton Gardens, which was a sport of Paddy McCready. This was Sam's last introduction. And we also have a name for the area, the district, Waikato. Some rosarians around the world may know this as Velvet Ruby. If we go south again, we come to the Tiamutu Rose Garden, I should say. This was set up at the time of the 1971, the first World Rose Convention held in Hamilton. It was built for that convention, and it's a very lovely garden with a lot of extensive plantings in it. For roses in Tiamutu, some of you may know Big Purple or Stevens Big Purple, which was bred by local breeder Pat Stevens, who had a very close relationship with Sam McCready. And I remember from my younger days, Pat used to come up to Sam's greenhouse every summer at budwood time to help Sam collect his budwood to go on to the nursery for propagation. And Pat did a little bit of breeding himself, and two of these probably more famous ones are the Tiamutu Centennial and Big Purple. Sam McCready had a very close relationship with the Stevens when he first came to New Zealand back in the early days. He named a rose Patty Stevens for Pat's wife, and Patty Stevens is probably one of the most widely grown hybrid tea roses in New Zealand. We move just on the other side of Hamilton, and there's a new commercial nursery set up a number of years ago, Amore Roses. They now run a display garden, have a display garden of all the roses that they import from breeders around the world, and they have agencies for a number of New Zealand breeders. And we move on to Rotorua. Firstly, we go to the government gardens in Rotorua, and there's a delightful rose garden there, which has always been Tommy Kens's favourite town. For those you know Tommy, he always enjoyed Rotorua, and he always enjoyed the aroma that came from Rotorua. So we've put this in for Tommy's memory. He'll enjoy this. And there is for this garden, there's a tie-up with the town in Oregon and the US for those Americans who are here and wonder about the name of the garden. Also in Rotorua, we have the Murray Linton Rose Garden. Murray Linton was a former past president of the New Zealand Rose Society, and he was also a mayor of Rotorua. Going further south, we come to Taupo, which is a huge lake in the middle of the North Island of New Zealand. And for Taupo, Sam named orangey red floribunda for this town. In the town we have the Joan Williamson Rose Garden, which is a small garden just based on the side of the lake. Quite attractive in full bloom. Moving over to the east coast of the North Island, we have Gisborne City, and in there's 2 or 3 gardens. The major one is the James Parker Memorial Garden, which is just off the downtown Gisborne. For roses that came out named after Gisborne, we have Bob Matthews named Gisborne 2000. Sam had Matafero Magic. And Matafero Magic, you'll probably know is around the world is simply the best. And also Sam produced Nobilo Chardonnay, and you may know that as Chardonnay in other parts of the world. Moving south down that east coast, we come to Napier, and in Napier we have Kennedy Park. Kennedy Park had in the early days, it had a bed of iceberg roses about 3 metres tall and about 5 or 6 metres wide or round, and it was an absolutely magnificent display. Going south of Napier, we come to Hastings, where they have Frimley Park, another delightful garden in the Hawke's Bay area of the country. Heather Horner named a rose City of Hastings for this town, and this is an attractive yellowy gold floribunda. Moving south, we come to the display garden of the commercial nursery of Matthews Roses. Matthews is run by Bob and Samantha Matthews. Samantha is the next generation of the Matthews family, and they've been commercial nurserymen for, I'm going to say, many years. And Hayden will talk about the work that Bob's done in breeding of roses. They run a display garden of all their introduced varieties, and they have agencies from many of the overseas breeders in New Zealand. Just south of Wanganui, where Matthews are, we have the Mason family garden. The Mason family were nurserymen in New Zealand for many years until they retired. I think it was 2 or 3 generations of Masons involved, and they were importers of overseas rose material. Next we come to Palmerston North, where we have the Dougal Mackenzie Rose Garden. Some of you will remember this if you went to the World Federation Regional Convention that Hayden ran in 2013. It's a delightful garden. It's my hometown. It's Hayden's hometown, so we have a soft spot for this garden. It received the World Federation of Rose Societies Garden of Excellence Award in 2003. For roses named for the area, for the Manawatu area where Palmerston North is, we just lost one. We have roses bred by Nola Simpson, and Hayden will talk to you about Nola and her breeding work. She bred Manawatu and she bred Victorian Esplanade. And also in Palmerston we have Pride of Palmy, which is the rose that was bred for the 50th anniversary of the trial grounds there. And one for Sam McCready, he named Massey University as for the university that's in the town. In the Dougal Mackenzie trial grounds, we have the New Zealand International Rose Trial Grounds, where these are trials for varieties that are just about to be released onto the market, the early generations material, and there are a number of awards are given out at this trial every year. This trial is also a spray-free trial, no pesticides used in the trial, to give the public an indication of how the newer roses are performing without the addition of chemical. Moving south now, we come to Levin, where we have the Nola Simpson Rose Garden. It's a new rose garden. It's so far it looks absolutely delightful, and it's an enjoyable place to visit. Going south, we come to the Lady Norwood Rose Garden in Wellington. This was a World Federation of Rose Societies Garden of Excellence Award winner in 2015. It is now, like most public gardens in New Zealand now, it's becoming spray-free with no pesticides being used in that area. If we move over into the South Island, across Cook Strait, we come to Nelson, and first garden I've got to show you is the Samuel's Rose Garden at Broad Green House. Broad Green House is an old colonial homestead, now a public garden run by the Nelson City Council. In that area we've had Tasman Bay roses, and this is a commercial rose nursery that introduces varieties from Warners and Tantau into New Zealand. They have the two I've got here at Nelson Girls, and some of you may know it. If you're an Australian, you'll know it by Serenity. For Nelson College, it's called Piano in Germany and Hope and Glory in the USA. Moving south to Christchurch, this was in there we have the Botanic Gardens, and we also have in the Botanic Gardens we have the Heritage Rose Garden. This Botanic Gardens Rose Garden received the Award of Merit for Garden of Excellence in 2018. For those who remember Christchurch from the World Rose Convention there in 1994, the Rose World Convention, they'll remember the garden. As part of the convention in '94, we have the Mona Vale Garden, which was built as part of this, and that's part of that convention. For roses that come out of Christchurch, Christchurch is part of the earthquake belt of New Zealand, where we had real decent earthquakes, and most of the centre of the city has now been rebuilt, and it's almost completed again, back to normal. We have Christchurch Remembers, bred by Rob Summerfield, and Hayden will talk about Rob's breeding. We also have, I've already mentioned Roseworld, a Nola Simpson rose, the Rose Christchurch, which you'll know as Super Trooper if you're from the United Kingdom, and Sam's City of Christchurch rose. If we move on to go south about an hour's drive, we come to a small town called Timaru. And in Timaru we have a collection of species roses. And David Ruston always used to rave about this collection, and he thought this is one of the better collections of different species around the world. And I can't remember exactly the number they have in there. Somebody might be able to tell me. Don't know. No, doesn't matter. And also as part of Timaru we have the Trevor Griffith Rose Garden. This was also awarded the Garden of Excellence Award from the Federation in 2012. It's a delightful garden where you can view most of it from up on the top of the hill. And down in it, yeah, there's a whole heap of archways and extensive planting. For roses named in Timaru, we have Mike Athy, a breeder from Gisborne, New Zealand breeder. He had Caroline Bay, and Austin named a rose City of Timaru. Where are we? Moving south, we come to the city of Dunedin, and in Dunedin we have the Botanic Rose Garden. Some of you may have seen the video on this garden if you went to the World Federation Awards meeting earlier in the week. For Dunedin and the Otago region, Rob named a rose Otago University for the university there, and Sam had a miniature rose called Otago. If we move south further to the skiing capital of the country, to Queenstown, on the lake in Queenstown, we have a small rose garden set in a number of huge, extensive specimen trees. Going south again, we come down to Invercargill, where there is 2 rose gardens in Queen's Park, one for modern roses, the Henry Eggleton Rose Garden, and we also have the Jesse Corder Rose Garden as part of this, as a collection of heritage roses. Now we move on to the piece on New Zealand breeders, and I'll pass you on to Hayden.
Okay, well, thank you, Doug. I'm going to do the second half on New Zealand rose breeders, and again, we have much more rose breeders in New Zealand. I'm just showing you, so I could be here for the whole morning if I had them all, but these are the main ones who have got varieties on the market in New Zealand at the moment. So first of all, we'll really have to start with Sam McGreedy, and what a wonderful legacy he's left to the world of roses with the many varieties that are grown around the world. Sam also left a wonderful legacy to New Zealand. I consider his 2 big legacies in New Zealand. Number one, he encouraged all the rose breeders in New Zealand. He was very giving of his knowledge and time. And secondly, he was responsible for introducing plant variety rights in New Zealand way back in 1972. And that gave New Zealand plant breeders, not just rose breeders, but agricultural breeders, the ability to protect their varieties. And it certainly lifted the standard of and the profile of New Zealand horticulture. So certainly we thank Sam very much for what he's done for roses in New Zealand. So first of all, we're going to start with some of his fragrant roses. First of all, Aotearoa, or New Zealand as it's known around the world, and it's white sport, land along white cloud, or full sail, as some of you will know in other parts of the world. Super Bowl, also extremely fragrant, and I think Sam named that because the Super Bowl was at the height of the season when Sam was breeding roses, so I thought he'd give them a name. And Arthur Bell is also grown, I believe, widely in other parts of the world. In fact, I was discussing with David Kenny the other day, maybe it's one of Sam's best fragrant roses. Of course, Sam's hand-painted roses. This came out of a line way back in the 1970s. First up was Picasso. And remember Sam telling us he had a bit of a battle to get Picasso to sign the piece of paper that he was happy to have his name on a rose, but eventually got it. Old Master is one of my favourite of the hand-painteds, and Matangi is actually the first plant protected in New Zealand under the Plant Variety Rights Act. And there's some other ones there. Rock and Roll or Stretch Johnson, that's also another of my favourite Sam McGreedy hand-painted roses. Stripes, now people either love or loathe these things. Oranges and lemons, certainly very, very flamboyant. Probably one of the best striped roses you can grow is Michelangelo or the painter. And also we've got Hurdy-Gurdy and Roller Coaster, which was never actually released in New Zealand, but released overseas. Sam McGreedy's hybrid teas. Doug's will talk to you about Paddy Stevens. It grows very, very well in New Zealand, and it's sport of Hamilton Gardens. They're both very, very good roses. Mallard Jubilee or Electron, that was an earlier Sam hybrid tea, which grew very well around the world. Clodagh McGreedy is Sam's youngest daughter, and also Maria McGreedy, Sam's middle daughter. And there was also another hybrid tea named for Catherine McGreedy, Sam's oldest daughter. So in the last few years he did name one roses for his family. And I must also mention Olympiad, which Sam was most proud of because it probably made him the most money. It was the official rose of the 1984 Olympics in Los Angeles, and I believe the first year it produced 750,000 plants, and I think it was consistently good for many years, sales-wise, around the world. Sam McGreedy's climbers, and of course yesterday at the Botanic Gardens we saw the Dublin Bays growing along the fence. It's still reasonably popular in New Zealand. Unfortunately, it is becoming a bit more susceptible to rust and climate. Other Sam McGreedy ones, of course, Bantry Bay, Handel, which is still grown widely in New Zealand, Schoolgirl, Galway Bay and Casino, probably not so well grown now. In fact, I think Sam made comment, he sort of, once he came to New Zealand, sort of the climber line sort of fell away, and I think that was possibly a regret of his that he didn't push on with it a bit more. Sam's miniature roses, Kaikoura, for any of those who've been to New Zealand and seen our rose show, you always see Kaikoura at a rose show. It's pretty much perfection for exhibiting in New Zealand in our STEM classes. Wanaka, which is named for a small town just out of Queenstown in New Zealand. Little Artist was sold in New Zealand and all the plants were lost. And in the last few years we actually just had it re-imported back into New Zealand again. And Snow Carpet, well, I consider Snow Carpet a rose ahead of its time. It was one of the creepy crawlies, as Sam used to call them. And there's a very good story which he actually had a red one. And he went away and Pat and Paddy Stevens were apparently looking after her seedlings and killed it. Okay, now we come on to Nola Simpson, and Nola was a mentor of mine getting into roses. She was a wonderful person. She was very supportive and encouraging, very knowledgeable, very sharing of her time with roses. And even now I look back and think, oh, wish Nola was still here to answer a few questions that I have about things. She certainly was a great person for roses in New Zealand, and I was very fortunate to be able to spend the time that I did around her. And of course, Nola's most well-known rose is Hot Chocolate, and it's believed it's grown in Australia, or was grown in Australia, and also Chocolate Prince or Terracotta, as Mayons have introduced it around the world. Nola liked the novelty colour. She always said, I don't want to keep reinventing the wheel, I want something different. She also liked her exhibition. She was quite strong on exhibiting roses. Reflections was a good floribunda, and I remember David Ruston, when he was in New Zealand in 2004, he saw it for the first time at the show in Hamilton, proceeded to pick up the vase that are off the champion table and walked around the show for the next hour telling everybody how wonderful it is. much to the horror of all the officials at the show. Victoria Esplanade is named for the park where the Dougal Mackenzie Rose Garden is for its centenary. And Silky Mist was one of Nola's best exhibition hybrid teas that she released. But yeah, she left a wonderful legacy of roses, and luckily her nephew John Ford, which I'm going to talk about soon, is carrying on some of her work. Brian Atfield, he was from Cambridge, which is just outside of Hamilton, and Brian was a breeder. He was a breeder mainly of show-type roses. Sir Tristram is named for a racehorse, well-known New Zealand racehorse. It's beautiful red. Delightful Lady was one of his earlier ones, and that was again named for a racehorse. And Joan Monica was named for his wife. And they're all very good exhibition hybrid teas in New Zealand. Some of you will remember, if you came to Christchurch in '94, going to Barry and Dawn Eagle's nursery. They were miniature rose specialists in New Zealand for many, many years. Barry passed away a number of years ago, and Dawn is still active in rose circles, and they were mainly concentrated on breeding miniature type roses. Dawn's most well-known rose is Moonlight Lady, and she was lucky to meet Julio Iglesias a few years after the rose was named, because he was having a concert in Christchurch, and the promoters invited along to meet them. Aoraki is a patio climber, and Southern Honey another miniature. So Dawn's done quite a bit of work for miniature type roses in New Zealand. Frank Sherman. Frank is a specialist cut flower rose grower, or was a specialist cut flower rose grower. Sam McGreedy leased space off his greenhouses when he first came to New Zealand. So a lot of Frank's stuff has ended up overseas. Frank's originally from Holland, so it gave him quite a bit of a kick when his roses went back into Holland a number of years ago. One of his early cut flowers was Darling, and also Gold Strike was probably one of his most successful ones. He also dabbled in garden roses. Syntasia was one of his most well-known ones in New Zealand. It was introduced as a patio, but it's pretty much a floribunda size, that's how I grow it. And Little Opal is a popular miniature rose for exhibitors in New Zealand. David Benny, he's from down the bottom of the South Island. He's actually pretty much retired from breeding roses. He's a sheep farmer. His most well-known rose is Dear One, which he named for his wife. She didn't want a rose named for her, so he called it Dear One, as tribute to her. Beach Baby is another popular one of David's in New Zealand, and also Gold Dust, which won a number of awards around the country in New Zealand. As Doug mentioned, the Matthews family, they run a large rose nursery at Wanganui, and they're actually celebrating 75 years of business this year. It's the second oldest rose nursery in New Zealand. Some of you will have met Bob and Kath, either in New Zealand or around the world, and their daughter Samantha's coming into the business and making quite an impact. Bob's been breeding we had him along at a local Rose Society meeting in September, and he's been basically breeding roses all his life, but in the last 30 years, that's when he's sort of taken it, done a lot more. And his first rose he released was Anniversary, and this was for the 50th anniversary of Matthews Nurseries back in 1997, and it also won the Gold Star of the South Pacific in Palmerston North. Another one of Bob's, which is popular, and I believe is won trial awards around in Europe, is Diamonds Forever. It's a yellow fragrant rose. And another one that Bob has had quite a lot of success with is My Mum. This was actually named for Bob's mother, Pearl. Bob's father passed away, and Bob planted a whole lot of seedling roses at her place to cheer her up, and Bob's mother fell in love with this rose. So it was named My Mum, and it's a fantastic rose. I remember seeing it in the seedling block at Bob's a number of years ago and thinking, oh, that's quite a nice one. And Bob's been working with it. He's got a whole collection now, what he's calling the My Rose series. So there's my dad, my grandma, my granddad, yeah. And Bob's doing a lot with health as well. He's no spray in his selections. Many of you also would have known Rob Summerfield, and Rob's also doing a lot of selections around no spray roses. He's done quite a bit with pink flower carpet. It's coming through in a lot of his work. So his first release was Blackberry Nip. That was 1996, and it's still growing today. It's beautiful, fragrant hybrid tea. And there's also a climbing form, which has been released in the last 10 years in New Zealand. Another one, early one, is Sky Tower, which any of you came to the regional in Auckland in 2004. There was a magnificent display of this rose at the Rose Show. Those of you who came to Palmerston North in 2013 will remember Pacific Glory, which was our convention rose, and it has proven to be a very, very good rose, not only for exhibition, but also as a garden rose in New Zealand. Rob named Looking Good for a cancer charity in New Zealand a number of years ago, and it's quite a strong, tall growing pink. Wild Cherry is actually a sister seedling of Pacific Glory, and it's a beautiful cherry coloured, also popular in New Zealand for exhibition. And Christchurch remembers, Rob wanted to name one in remembrance of the Christchurch earthquakes, and as he said to me, he said it had to be red, because red is the Canterbury colours. So he wanted something red, and that was a winner at the Palmerston North Trials as well. Rob's been very giving of roses to rose people and rose societies in New Zealand. He named the one Pride of Palmy for the 50th anniversary of the trial grounds. The Mayor of Palmerston North wanted a green rose, and I said, sorry, you can't have a green rose, it won't really sell. How about a nice yellow one, Mr. Mayor? So we got the yellow one. And Rob also named one called Centurion for my grandfather on the occasion of his 100th birthday in 2019. And I have 8 of them planted along just inside my front gate, which will be looking good when I come home from here. Now, I better be careful what I say about this guy, because I might have to find another hotel room tonight. Doug lives just south of Auckland, and those of you know anything about top half of the North Island, it gets very, very humid. We call it Downy Central. It gets a lot of downy mildew. In Palmerston North we have a lot of wind, so we don't have problems with downy mildew, we just get a lot of rust. So Doug's first rose was Everlasting Love 25 years ago, and that was a Silver Star winner for the best amateur bred rose in the Palmerston North Trials, and it's still growing today. It's also a popular exhibition rose. And Doug's also done a bit of work with climbers. We call them compact climbers. Some of the climbers in New Zealand can get a bit of out of hand in our climate, and these ones stay a bit smaller. And I know All My Love is a beautiful, beautiful climbing rose. It's absolutely magnificent in full flower. And Candy and Cherry Kiss is also wonderful as well. George Sherwood, he started breeding roses, I think early 1960s. And he was probably more quality than quantity. And he actually only passed away last year. He lived to 97, and I went to see him a few weeks before he passed away. And he was, as he said to me, he said, the body's given up, but the mind's still going full bore. He was still, he was still wanting to talk roses. So we talked roses for a couple of hours. Nancy Steen was named for the leading heritage rose authority in New Zealand for many years. A good rose. Kate Shepherd is, in my opinion, highly underrated in New Zealand. Kate Shepherd was the leader of the movement to give women the right to vote in New Zealand, and we were the first country to do so in 1893. It's a magnificent pink floribunda. Any of those who know me, I'm not a big pink fan, but this is one I really like. And Margaret Sherwood was named for George's mother in recent years, and that's a wonderful white hybrid tea. I mentioned John Ford. He's the nephew of Noel Simpson, and he's a well-known rosarian in his own right. And I'm sort of fortunate that I've been under the mentorship of Noel for many years, and now John is a very close friend and confidant in the rose world. And so John is a plant breeder by profession. He breeds clovers, but he also is a very good rose breeder. He's got a very good eye for a rose. One of his most recent releases, in fact only just brand new in New Zealand this year, is Bright Eyes. And John is pictured with it in the trial in Palmerston North. We had to do John's the chairman of the trial grounds in Palmerston North, and we had to be a bit sneaky because it won the gold star. But I couldn't tell John that, but I did tell John it had won the novelty prize and the best New Zealand bred prize. So John turned to me to announce them, and I said, well, I've actually got a bit of a surprise for you, John. It's also got the gold star, and he just about fell over in shock. So it's a very good Persica type rose. It's more of a floribunda type. It holds its head up well. That picture where it was taken, the weather we had that day in Palmerston North was pretty much like we're having here in Adelaide, pretty awful. John's also got Southern Beauty, which is a fantastic floribunda as well, and his early one was Young Heart, and we'll probably see a bit more of John's stuff coming for over the next few years. In the UK, he's got a number of roses with style roses. Mike's actually got more stuff overseas than in New Zealand. The Daisy Rose was a multiple award winner in Biltmore a number of years ago, and Thank You, or Jelly Baby, is a little patio. So certainly look out for Mike's stuff, I think, in South Africa and in Europe and also in the States. That's just some more of Mike's roses. And that's the end of our presentation. So I'd just like to thank everybody and also extend an invitation to come to New Zealand and see our beautiful roses. Just let Doug or myself know you're coming. We can sort out the good gardens to see, the breeders and the roses to enjoy. So thank you.
Thank you, Hayden, and thank you, Doug, very much indeed. If there's a way to spend 40 minutes on a Tuesday morning, I think that was it. Sit down and listen to a total expose of and a tour of New Zealand, of rose gardens, and looking at who's doing all the work in breeding the wonderful roses they do at the moment. So thank you, Doug and Hayden. So as a token of our appreciation, we have gifts for Hayden and Doug.
Thank you.
Again, thank you very much, and another round of applause, I think, because that was very nice. Now we have Daniel Boulens, and he is talking on the rose gardens from Lyon and Elsewhere, parks and gardens and their importance for our cities. Please welcome Daniel.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank my Australian friends Wendy and Merv and the organizing committee of this World Convention of Roses Society for inviting me here to Adelaide. Sorry for my broken voice. I got a cold yesterday at Carrick Hill. And you will have noticed from my terrible accent that I am from France. But don't say that this accent is so romantic. Roses, a fairy tale. That was the theme of our last convention in Copenhagen. For my presentation today, I would have liked to tell you about a fairy tale about roses and garden. But I will instead borrow the title of the president of the Solar Impulse Foundation, the Swiss Bertrand Piccard, to say realistic, logical, as well as ecological, to present the importance of our parks and gardens for the future of our cities. In the first part of my reading, allow me to introduce myself and show you all the links I have had with roses and the gardens since my youth. I was born nearly 67 years ago on the shores of Lake of Geneva near Switzerland and Italy. Coming from a family involved in horticulture and gardens, I certainly inherited the green chromosomes from my parents, and I had a nature and environment-oriented upbringing. Look at this picture. I was 7 years old. My parents had taken me and my two sisters to visit the rose garden in the Parc de la Grange in Geneva in Switzerland. Also, the picture is not the best quality. One can nevertheless notice that the rose garden in Geneva was magnificent at that time. I must admit that roses at the time did not really interest me. But my father spent hours writing down the names of roses, shrubs, and trees. He was passionate, and he wanted to develop in his profession and progress socially. As a teenager, and then as a young adult, I have always been passionate about nature, mountains, and mountaineering. I have always loved direct contact with rocks, mountain, snow, and ice, and it's this passion for mountaineering has enabled me to discover the world and climb very high peaks. And on the way on these summits, there were always beautiful discoveries, including roses. You will see this in the next slide. My study of biology at the university triggered my passion for plants. To finance my studies, I worked as a mountain guide, specializing in alpine and medicinal plants. After a master's degree in biology, I continued my studies with an agronomic engineering degree. My first job in 1982 was as a technical manager of a large nursery in the Lyon area. And guess what I did for the first 6 months? Grafting fruit trees and roses. Again, I have to say that I preferred the fruit trees because they were much easier to graft. For the roses, we were in a team of 2. I followed an old hand who was grafting, and I have to tie the graft with cellophane tape. This person, who was almost 60 years old, had an incredible rhythm, and I couldn't keep up. I had terrible backache. In this nursery, there was also a biologist researcher who developed a process of coating the roots of the roses with an agar. The agar contained fertilizers that were supposed to make it easier for the roses to recover in the soil. But the big problem was that the agar liquefied in the plastic bags in garden center, a commercial disaster. But you learn a lot from experiences, whether they are positive or negative. I stayed 1 year in this nursery. Then I went to Saudi Arabia to work as a public space manager in a city under construction in the desert. It was an extraordinary job. I learned a lot about plants adapted to arid climates. We planted a lot of roses that grew very well with good watering. I returned to France in 1984 to work as Deputy Director of the Parks and Garden Departments of the town of Chambéry in Savoie in the Alps, a beautiful city of 50,000 inhabitants. I was extraordinarily lucky to have a director with a great humanism. He had the desire to share his knowledge and to help me progress. Every opportunity was good for my technical learning as well for human management. There was a team of 92 people, and roses became part of my professional activity here. In 1986, the mayor of Chambéry wanted to create a rose garden in the park of a small castle in the town. This is this picture. The director sent me to visit the rose garden in the Tête d'Or Park in Lyon to get some ideas. I met the director of Parks and Garden in Lyon, who gave me a lot of advice on rose varieties, planting, diseases, maintenance, and so on. With all this advice, we created the rose garden in Chambéry with about 30 varieties and nearly 2,000 plants. Yes, it has already been 35 years. How time flies. In 1988, I left Chambéry to become director of the Grenoble Parks and Garden Department and then also of the cleaning department, a great team of 400 agents. I was always passionate about roses in the landscape, and I had planted many. At that time, the red rose, La Sevillana, was a revelation. I had more than 20,000 of them planted in the city. The roadsides, medians, and roundabouts were red from May to the end of October in the Northern Hemisphere summer. In the 90s, the French Rose Society Association asked me to become a member of the permanent jury of the Lyon competition Rose Garden. I gladly accepted and came 4 times during the summer to judge the new roses. I would take my wife Aline and our 2 children to the Rose Garden, and afterwards we will enjoy a picnic in this beautiful park. And in the 2000, the position of Director of Green Spaces for the City of Lyon was vacant. After a competition and a serious selection process, I was chosen to lead the destiny of this beautiful department, its magnificent Tête d'Or Park, and its rose gardens. In December 2001, I moved to Lyon with my family for a new slice of life. Back. I was lucky enough to have a mayor and municipal councillors who trusted me and gave me a great deal of autonomy to propose and develop green spaces in the city. The mayor wanted to develop green spaces for the well-being of the inhabitants, but also to reinforce the economic and tourist attractiveness of the city. It was a great challenge. I proposed many projects to improve the parks, squares, and gardens, and my intention was always to forge links and relationships with horticultural professionals, landscape architects, landscape companies, environmentalist associations, horticultural and roses associations in particular, vocational colleges, universities, and so on. I have developed a service project based on the respect for the environment and the health of the inhabitants. This led us to be the first city in France to stop using chemicals in parks and gardens in 2007. My links with the associations Société Française des Roses, French Rose Society, and Rose Ancienne en France, Heritage Rose Society, were developed in 2002. Of course, I was responsible for the Rose Garden contest in the Tête d'Or Park. Thus, international links were developed. I also had many contacts with the Swiss directors and Mr. Rose in Switzerland, Gérald Mélin. This gave rise to the idea that we could initially label the International Rose Garden in the Tête d'Or Park and then perhaps organize a World Convention of Roses Society. Gérald Mélin proposed that we should be a candidate for the World Federation Garden Award of Excellence. I therefore worked very hard on this dossier with the French Rose Society. And at the World Convention in Osaka in 2006, the World Federation awarded the Parc de la Tête d'Or Rose Garden. We were very proud of this result. The rapid progress we have made in environmental matters has placed the Green Spaces Department as a national and international leader in the management of parks and gardens. And from 2002 onwards, I participated in and lectured at international conferences in many, many countries. It was very exciting and rewarding. In 2007, Gérald Mélin, again, suggested that we should be candidates to host the World Federation Convention. This involved the French Rose Society taking on the project with the city of Lyon. Lyon is renowned for being the cradle of the modern rose, with prestigious growers such as Jean-Baptiste Guillot or Pernay-Duché. There was therefore a real legitimacy to host the World Convention and to promote this beautiful history of the Lyon rose. The municipality of Lyon validated this idea, and in 2009, we applied for the Lyon's Rose 2015 candidacy at the World Convention in Vancouver. The World Federation validated Lyon's bid in 2009, and we, therefore, had 6 years to prepare to welcome our rose friends. The 6 years were the occasion for many more visits around the world and participation in diverse conventions. As a member of Lyon International New Roses competition, I also took part in many rose competitions. Once again, this was an excellent opportunity to create technical links but above all, friendships. 2015 was the apotheosis for Lyon and the Roses. The World Convention brought together more than 700 participants from over 36 countries. And above all, we organized an international rose festival for the people of Lyon with more than 700 events over nearly 6 months. Extraordinary. I think that many of you experienced these moments of passion and sharing in Lyon in 2015. I had the pleasure of continuing the Rose adventure with regional and world conventions, Hyderabad, Beijing, Copenhagen, Nanyang. Here are some slides of these countries and meetings made during all these years during my leisure or my professional activities. This is the Rose of Lyon and Elsewhere section. I must mention that there are only the photos taken since 2009 when I acquired my first digital camera. Please enjoy these nice places and rose gardens. See Beijing, Budapest in Hungary, Vancouver, Butchard's Gardens, Stanley Park in Vancouver, Sakura Rose Garden in Japan, Keisei Rose Garden near Yokohama, Japan, Atami Rose Garden, Japan, Gifu in Japan, Echigo Hillside Rose Garden in Nagaoka, Japan. In Nagaoka, La France, in the Rose Garden. Geneva, the Rose Trial in 2012. Nyon in Switzerland, the new Rose Trial Garden. Copenhagen, Fredensborg Castle. Copenhagen, in the streets of Copenhagen. Copenhagen, Valby Park, very nice park with very kind people. Barcelona, the Cervantes Rose Garden. Barcelona, in Saint Feliu Rose Garden. Hyderabad in India. Mr. Khan's Rose Garden in Hyderabad. Bangalore in India. Ooty in India. Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. Elbow Cemetery, La Réunion, Bourbon Island. Madrid, Rosaleda del Parque del Oeste. Climbing in Nepal, a wild rose. Cusco in Peru. Pisa in Italy. L'Heureux in Belgium. Mount Ararat in Turkey during the climbing. Reykjavik, Iceland. Near Ushuaia in Argentina. In Bulgaria, in Kazanlik. Marrakech, Morocco. Peradeniya Garden, Sri Lanka. Changzhou in China. Sapa in Vietnam, in the mountains in the north. Meillan Rose Garden near Eyrieux, near Lyon. Paris, Bagatelle, l'Aille-les-Roses Garden in France, Baden-Baden, Germany, Ettenbull Rose Garden in Germany last September, Adelaide Garden. And now, the second part of my presentation, the importance of our parks for our city, reflects, of course, the core of my professional activity. As I told you before, roses were only a small part of my activity. My main activity has been the organization and the management of the Parks and Gardens Department with a great team of 400 people. Establishing a strategy linked to the environment, creating new spaces, maintaining them, developing new maintenance practices, seeking economic and environmental performance, and so on. All this has been a major focus of my work, and we have become a reference. Here again, I was very much in demand to share our experience in Japan, in China, and mainly in Europe. The experience of roses and green spaces were very closely linked. The rose, queen of flowers, still has a bad environmental image. The rose is widely criticized by environmental activists. In 2019, I was surprised to see communication campaigns encouraging people not to buy roses for Valentine's Day. This is something new. Cut flower roses from Africa or Central America are criticized for their crops that consume phytosanitary products or water, but also on the social level, low wages and poor working conditions for staff. I can totally understand this criticism, and we, rose lovers, must be aware of them. But the garden rose has undergone a completely different evolution. I have had the pleasure of working with some of the great Lyon breeders, such as Alain and Mathias Meillan, Rother, Horaire, Laperrière, Félix, and many international breeders. This picture was taken in L'Heureux last September, and you can recognize many of them. All of them have made enormous progress in the selection of their roses in terms of resistance to cold, dryness, and of course, disease. The garden rose now has its place in the landscape composition of parks and gardens. In France, since January 2017, local authorities can no longer use chemicals in public spaces. And since 2019, these bans also apply to private individuals for their private gardens. We faced with this new regulation, the only possible evolution was a search for rose resistant. But the other major trend that affects our entire planet on a more global level is the issue of the climate change. It doesn't matter whether the causes are human or natural, but the consequences are very real. The terrible fires in Australia or California the very high temperature recorded in France in 2019, the floods in Europe or even in Australia at the beginning of the July 2022 are all the markers of these climate changes. Look at this view of my vegetable garden after a violent hailstorm on July the 4th. Unfortunately, these events are more and more frequent now. So, what shall we do? We can easily foresee that our current consumption pattern in the rich industrialized countries cannot be the reference for a population of 9 billion people on the planet. Of course, we will have to innovate, look for less polluting production methods, but we will certainly have to consume less and better, and in a more environmentally friendly way. The younger generations are very sensitive to these approaches. And among this evolution and the demands of the inhabitants of large cities, green developments are in demand. We, as landscape architects, designers, or space managers, therefore have tremendous opportunities ahead of us. Never has the demand for creating nature in the city been so strong. I deliberately use the word nature and not garden because citizens are asking for something green and organic, something natural. Now, parks and gardens must provide new functions. If in the 17th and 18th century, gardens were the reflection of a society capable of dominating nature and ordering it according to man's will, today, green spaces are expected to fulfill many functions: environmental, social, and human. Environmental from several angles, notably photosynthesis, with the fixation of CO2 and the production of oxygen, with the role of air conditioning through evapotranspiration, with the roles of maintaining the soil and regulating floods or drinking water reserve. Social, due to the fact that public space is, by definition, open to all, whatever the social level of the people who use it. But also because of the possible interactions between users, games for children, meetings for adults, and so on. Human, because nature in the city has proven effects on the physical and mental health of the people who use these spaces. Trees should be the focus of our attention. A Swiss scientific study from University of Zurich has shown that the effect of CO2, carbon dioxide, could be neutralized by planting 1,200 billion trees on the planet. And there is enough space to do that. Tomorrow's parks will have to take this ecological and environmental dimension fully into account. Not totally convinced? Then take a look at this photo, which shows us the importance of trees along the avenues of our big city. The simple shade produced by trees, but also their transpiration, contributes to reducing urban heat islands. But trees will not be enough if we do not change our practices, both in the maintenance of our gardens and in our daily lives. I really like this picture. I think using your mowers in Australia is really a hobby. But do you think it's really a good one? Not sure. Not sure. I will explain you later. Our public and private gardens must be cultivated and maintained in an environmentally friendly way, saving natural resources, less water, so plants that are more resistant to dryness, fewer or no chemicals, less fossil fuels, so less use of engines such as lawn mowers or other horticultural machinery. We will have to regain the great natural balances, favor the water cycle in the garden, rainwater harvesting, but also reinfiltration into the soil with less impermeable soil. Participate in the balance of ecosystem and the development of biodiversity. We will also have to reduce all our negative impacts, such as noise. Think of the noise of blowers or lawn mowers, but also all the solvent and paint used to paint the fences. It will be necessary and essential to review our waste management. Most amateur gardeners already have a composter in their garden. But let's also think about all the plastic waste from pots, packaging bags, or cans that we use. The list of actions could be very long, and I am sure you could give other examples. We will have to rethink our thinking. The beautiful garden will no longer be the one where the lawn looks like a golf green, but a natural garden which welcomes the maximum of biodiversity. To have a beautiful garden around one's house, to have a beautiful public garden for the pleasure and well-being of all is a fine objective. But this garden, as I just said, must be as natural as possible. I remember that here in Australia in the 2000s, my colleagues in charge of the parks and gardens launched a campaign, Healthy Parks, Healthy People. Yes, this approach makes sense, a lot of sense, and we must continue it. This is my garden. Do you think I am joking? No, it is mine. This Tetador Park, it's my garden. So, for our health, for our pleasure, and our happiness, as Voltaire said, let's cultivate our garden. And to conclude, I would like to make this analogy with painting. In a park, as in a painter's painting, several levels make up the decor and the structure. If the trees are the framework of the painting, the lawns constitute the feeling, and the flowers, the perennials, the shrubs, and first and foremost the roses, create the dynamics, the color, the joy, and the emotion. Now, just before the last one picture, I think I have more time. I think I have more time. This was the first part. Can you hear me with this one? This one's the first part of my lecture, my very official lecture. But now there is, like on a medal, you have two sides. This was the third side of my speech. And the second part is less official. But I like to do that because I think our planet is in danger, really. And maybe we're in Australia now, and I remember the first time I visited you, it was 4 years ago. I drove the road between Melbourne and Canberra with good friends. And on this distance, there were many killed or injured kangaroos. And my friends told me, oh, we have to pay attention to the kangaroos. They are crossing the roads when the dark is coming. Okay, maybe 30 killed or injured kangaroos. And I told them, why do we have to pay attention? This is a land of kangaroos. This is not our land. This is the land of the wildlife. And we built a road in the middle of the wild place. The kangaroo, it's the place of the kangaroo, and the kangaroo is not dangerous. And please keep in mind the first lecture of Chris Daniels. I liked the graph where Chris Daniel showed the increase of the population and the increase of the biomass. But in this biomass, what we can see, it was very parallel like that, growing. But this biomass was essentially with cows and animals for our meat, for our consumption. But do you remember the very small part of the wild biomass? This biomass is now disappearing very, very fast. And we need all this biodiversity. If we want pollinators, we don't need only domestic bees. Domestic bees is only one species, only one. But in the wild, there are more than 2,000 different wasps and bees participating in pollination. So if you kill all these insects, what will do the pollination and the production of our fruit trees, our vegetables? So can you understand how much it is important to preserve our environment? So please, don't use any more chemicals in your gardens. You kill the nature, you kill the biodiversity. When I started my job in Lyon Park and Gardens, in the rose garden, it was in 1 year, in one season, they used more 30 spray during 4 months to keep the rose garden at the maximum of beauty in brackets. Now, but at this time, you can see no aphids. Okay, no aphids. But no butterflies, no bugs, no birds. Oh, very strange. No life in the rose garden. Since we stopped in 2007, now you can see aphids. Yes, a little bit. But you can see butterflies, you can see birds, you can enjoy to listen to the birds. And it is healthier for the nature, but for us. In your garden, take care of your chemicals. They are very dangerous for you. And maybe We don't know, but for the next generation, we have to save our gardens as we have to save our planet. So keep this in mind. It was the second part of my lecture. So now the last one, and if you have any question, I will be very pleased to answer to your question. So let's cultivate, but with an eco-friendly way, our gardens. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Daniel. If there's anyone out there who disagrees with anything what he said, they'll have to take a fight to me, because I'm in absolute agreement with what he said there. And we have to realise there is no planet B. So thank you very much, Daniel. I have a little something.
Thank you so much.
I believe Kelvin has a few words, a bit of housekeeping perhaps.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to say the weather is going to be kinder to us this afternoon, but if you listen to the forecast, it probably isn't. So rug up, bring your plastic, bring your umbrellas. I think the gardens you're going to will all have some protection and cover. The weather will be showery with long breaks in between. So when it's wet, you go under cover, and when it's dry, you go and look at the gardens. A few announcements. If you are a member of the Friends of the Federation of Rose Societies, and you have not paid your dues, you can do so at morning tea, so please pay them. For the friends who are going to the Friends dinner tonight, you are to meet in the foyer of the Intercontinental Hotel, which is next door, at 6:45 p.m, 6:45. So if you're going to the Friends dinner tonight, please meet in the foyer of the Intercontinental Hotel at 6:45. If you're not there at 6:45, you will not know where to go. So please be there, otherwise you may miss out. For the buses today, those who are on Tour A, going to the Trimpers, that's our garden, the buses will have an A, a letter A on it. There are 2 buses, so if you're going to the Trimper garden, get on the bus with an A on it. If you are going to the 3 other gardens, they will have the letter B, the letter B. Those buses leave at 1:35 p.m. today. Tomorrow, there will be 5 buses. They will be labelled for Tour A, A1, A2, A3, A4. For Tour B, B1. We also may have colours on the buses for you, but please ensure the bus you get on at the start of the day at 8:30 a.m. is the bus you stay on for the rest of tomorrow. Okay? So please make sure that happens. Our Fukuyama delegation have assured us, in fact we know they have, that their brochures have now arrived by transport from Sydney. They were delayed. They have now arrived, so you can pick up a brochure for the next World Rose Convention, which will be held in Fukuyama in 2025. You can pick them up from the Fukuyama stand at morning tea time. Next, the surveys you got yesterday. Who have filled them out? Hands up. Aren't you really, really good? You will go to the top of the class. You may submit those surveys in a box which is at the All Occasions Group stand in the morning tea area. There is a box to put your survey in. If you could do that, please, that would be fantastic. We appreciate your feedback on the expo. The rose which won the Adelaide, or the National Rose Trial Ground of Australia Rose of the Year was a rose called White Knockout, bred by Mayon. A photo of that rose will be in the morning tea area, as will be some booklets which provide details of every rose that won an award, Certificate of Merit, Bronze, Silver, Gold Award at the Rose Trial. You may feel free to collect one of those booklets if you didn't attend the Trial Grounds Awards presentation last evening. Finally, I understand some of you who are going to Melbourne have raised questions about baggage. You are allowed one suitcase to go to Melbourne. If you have more than one suitcase, like big case, then you will need to contact Tanya at Oliver Travel, and she is making arrangements for an alternative way to get your second case to Melbourne so that it is there for you before you depart on your international flights. If you have any further questions, please either ask me at morning tea or alternatively speak to the All Occasions Group desk at morning tea. I don't think there's anything. Have I missed anything, Melanie? Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelvin. We shall now break for morning tea. I need everybody back in here seated and all tickety-boo by 25 minutes to 11. 10:35.